Hello, this lecture on market segmentation, targeting, and positioning is associated with Module 6 and Chapter 7 in the textbook. Um, segmentation, targeting, and positioning is all part of the same process. It's sort of a three-part process. And segmentation being the first part, we look at our market and we break it up into groups, into different segments. And they're distinct groups with distinct needs, with distinct characteristics or behaviors that might require separate products or adjusting the marketing mix in some way for each individual segment. And there are four general segmentation methods: demographic segmentation, geographic. In the textbook, it's included under demographic, and psychographic, as well as behavioral. Demographic segmentation essentially looks at all different forms of different aspects of things that we can observe. Things like age. People with different ages will tend to prefer different products. What generation they are part of. And we have several generations that we generally identify. The only one that's actually specified by the U.S. Census Bureau is the baby boomers. They were born between 1946 and 1964. And this particular group, these were essentially, for the most part, children of people who served during World War II. World War II began. A lot of men went into the service and fought overseas in Europe and the Pacific and in other theaters of war. And after the war, they came back and they wanted to start families. And this, and you actually find this in nature when there is a natural catastrophe where there's lots of deaths. The birth rate rises immediately after, and that's what happened after World War II. There was a huge increase in the birth rate, and marketers have been following this generation for quite a while now. These were people who were maybe hippies during the 1960s and the yuppies in the 70s and 80s, and now they're actually in their 60s, 70s, or 80s now. And so we will, if we look at the various sorts of products that they were interested in, when they started having families, there was huge demand for things like safety seats and the safety cage in cars and things like that. As they're older now, there's a huge demand for retirement services, financial services, estate planning, medical healthcare. The retirement community industry has exploded in recent years. And this is because of the baby boomers. The baby boomers were followed by Generation X, born between 1965 and 1978. They were also referred to as the birth dearth. This was a much lower birth rate during this period. Understandably, and now we are having a resurgence. There was a Generation Y born between 79 and 93, and now Generation Z, which is the new sort of baby boomers. It's this huge swell in birth rate, and for the next 50, 60, 70 years, marketers will be following this group as well. And it's not a surprise to anyone that people in different generations tend to prefer different types of products, different offerings. We also look in demographic segmentation at family life cycle stages, which is kind of associated with age, but not necessarily. By life cycle stages, we mean things like, well, you're single, then you people couple up, often getting married, have young children. Those children get older. Then you have what are called empty nesters, where children have left the home. More recently, we've been hearing about boomerangers. That's when families where the children come back. Just because two people are at the same age doesn't mean necessarily they're in the same life cycle stage. Um, my brother, for example, is only slightly younger than I am, but about 3 years. Yet he's in a very different life cycle stage. I know other people who my age who are already grandparents. I'm nowhere near that right now. So just because people are the same age doesn't mean they're in the same life cycle. Um, so so age and life cycle are associated, but not perfect correlation. There are different household types. There's the traditional household type, mother, father, uh, 2 or 3 children, or maybe more. But we also have a single head of household. Um, we have mixed families, particularly with divorces and remarriages. We have same-sex households. We have multi-generational households where you know grandparents, parents, and children will live under the same roof. So we have all different, and we can all put those people into those different household type categories. Obviously, religion, there are on planet Earth over 2,000 religions, although most of us can identify the major religions. Various ethnic groups, particularly in the United States, we have a very mixed ethnicity. In other countries, it's perhaps not quite as complicated, but different people in different ethnic groups tend to prefer different products, things like food and so forth. Also, gender. Gender used to be fairly binary. However, society is reworking that. But we can generally, the majority of people tend to identify as either male or female, and we can identify those fairly readily. And we know that men and women definitely prefer different types of products. Sexual orientation and gender identification is also out there. Income levels, people who are wealthier tend to prefer different types of products, have different spending habits as opposed to people who are, not so wealthy. Occupation is another identifier. People in certain types of professions will tend to buy certain types of products. Education, both level and type, academic versus vocational, and different levels. Handicap status or disability. These are all, and you could probably find a few more metrics under demographic segmentation. Demographic segmentation is the most commonly used type of segmentation, and the reason for that, it is the easiest to identify. We're going to go through three other types of segmentation. However, this is the most used because if I just looked, if you and I meet and I looked at you, I could probably check off a few of the boxes under demographic segmentation. I can probably identify your gender. I could identify roughly your approximate age. I might be able to guess at some other things, and I can easily ask you the rest. I can ask you what your religion is, and you can easily identify that. As opposed to behavioral or psychographic, these might be a little bit more difficult for people to self-identify. Geographic segmentation, and this deals with where do people live or work, what world region or what country. On a more macro level, what state, county, or city or zip code do we live in? As we look at that, what population density? We're talking about city, urban areas, rural areas, suburban areas, and these are important because people in the different areas will tend to prefer and need different types of products. For example, if we were to take product category of lawn tractors, where do you think the greatest demand for lawn tractors would be? Urban areas, suburban areas, or rural areas? A lot of people will mistakenly say rural, but actually suburban areas have the greatest demand for lawn tractors, and the reason being that, and not every suburban area would require them, but it have to be an area that has houses with sufficient lawn size, um, and you would say, well, okay, well, why not rural? Well, uh, there's probably large lawns in rural areas, however, and they do have lawn tractors there, but it might be a couple miles between houses. So there is a higher density in a suburban area. Urban area, most people don't have lawns that require lawn tractors, that could use lawn tractors. However, there are large parks, and there the major consumer of lawn tractors would be the city or the municipality that has those parks. So our approach towards selling in each of these market segments, geographic segments, would be very different. If we were trying to sell into an urban area, we would go to the parks department. If we were trying to sell in a suburban area, we'll probably sell in places like Home Depot. In a rural area, we would probably focus more on John Deere or sort of farm supply places. Uh, Also, another way to segment geographically would include climate. Obviously, there are warmer climates and colder climates, drier and wetter climates. So, for instance, we will know that if we're selling surfboards, we're not going to sell a lot of surfboards in Montana. Likewise, we're not going to sell a lot of snowmobiles in Florida. So we understand the climate has a big effect on products that are sold. Our next form of segmentation is behavioral segmentation, obviously watching how we behave. And we look at usage occasions. Do people use this product regularly, or do they only use it on special occasions? As an example, if we were looking at champagne, most people tend to use it for special occasions. The biggest one is New Year's. After the clock strikes 12 at the end of the year, people, break out the champagne, that's when they drink it. And other special occasions, weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, that sort of thing. Now, there are people who, however, drink champagne on a much more regular level. I knew a woman who always kept 3 bottles of champagne in her freezer. She was a little bit wealthier, and it didn't take much to get her to pull one of those bottles of champagne out of the freezer. She was a very nice and generous lady. However, if you look at, let's say, another product, let's say beer, there are people who will drink it quite regularly. There's some people who drink beer every day. Other people who will just have it when they're socializing, going out to a bar. Some people will only have it on a special occasion, the way some people might drink champagne. Some people will have it for lunch, some people will have it for dinner. Anyway, these are usage patterns that we would want to pay attention to. And not just for champagne and beer, but for other types of products as well. User status, are they current users, lapsed users, occasional users? Or maybe they've never tried the product. So we might want to look at those different groups. The user rates, do people use it regularly? Do they consume a lot of it when they consume it, or maybe they just do it a little? We obviously are much more interested in people who use our product at a high rate. However, we might want to be targeting people who use it at a low rate and get them to use it at a higher rate. So again, we look at the different segments, and later we'll decide how we will handle that. There is something called the Pareto rule. It's also referred to as the 80-20 rule, which says that 80% of your sales will come from 20% of your customers. So you will look at user rates and obviously focus on the people who use it at a higher rate. There's also something called the long tail, and this is sort of the opposite of the 80-20 rule. Well, it's not the opposite, it's just the other part of it. If we for instance, if you think of movies the way they were normally traditionally launched, the idea is that it would come out in a movie theater, and that's where you get peak sales. And as the the initial spike, and then it would drop down over time. Most people had seen the movie, and you were just getting more residual people watching it. And that's at one point where essentially the movie theater would cut off and say, "Wait a minute, not enough people are coming in now, so we'll stop that, and we'll get a new movie in." And that would be sort of a cycle. Now, thanks to other technologies, starting way back when with the VHS tapes and then DVDs, and now we have streaming services, the long tail is essentially we would lose those sales. We've just cut them off in favor of higher sales. Now the long tail is quite valuable because while it is not as wonderful as the spike sales or peak sales, we can get more and more sales out of a product, whether it's a movie or a book. For instance, books would be published, there would be a printing, and then once you sold out, that was it, unless there was a huge demand warranted of reprinting. But now we have electronic books, and now Amazon has what I call the infinite bookshelf, because it's all digital, just staying on servers, and then you can either download it, or thanks to print on demand, you can you can print up books on a custom basis, on a print on demand basis. And we could talk a lot more about that, but I guess we should move on. In behavioral segmentation, we also look at brand loyalty. Should we focus on people who are completely loyal to our brand, or some people who maybe switch brands or not as loyal? For people who are not as loyal, is there something other than our brand name or brand loyalty that we can get them on? Maybe we have to run a sale or special offers. And again, of course, that costs more, and that's a decision. Should we go after low loyalty people, or stick with, focus primarily on high loyalty people? Okay. Also, the question is, what benefits are being derived from our product for our customer? And a great example of this is Arm & Hammer baking soda. I usually ask my students in a classroom, so what is Arm & Hammer baking soda? What is it for? And most people will say, well, it's in the name. It's baking soda. It's something that it's an ingredient that people use when they're baking from scratch. The interesting thing is that a lot of people don't bake from scratch anymore. I look at my mother-in-law. She always would bake from scratch. My mother, not so much. If my mother-in-law were making a cake, she would get all the ingredients and make the cake. My mother would probably go and get a cake mix, and put a couple eggs in it and stir it up and throw it in the oven. The baking from scratch has reduced considerably, and so there's a potential drop in demand for baking soda. However, Arm & Hammer discovered that other customers found a different benefit from it, and they weren't using it for baking, but actually using for deodorizing. They would put the Arm & Hammer, open up the box of Arm & Hammer baking soda, put it in the refrigerator, and it would absorb odors. And so Arm & Hammer actually ran a campaign. They went after this market segment, people who wanted it for its deodorizing properties. And so different customers will derive different benefits from product. And we talked about, features and benefits in a previous lecture. And so the question is, where do you want to focus? Which group that's deriving which benefits? And you want to take a look at all of them, and then make a decision. And we'll talk more about that decision. Our last segmentation method is psychographic, and this is about attitudes and beliefs. about lifestyles. It's the way people think about how you should live your life. And this gets into philosophy a little bit. Some people are experiencers. Other people are, makers and collectors, and they're very into acquiring goods and services. Um, there are some people, for instance, who owning a home is not important to them. It's not a goal. Other people, it is one of their top goals. And so this creates certain lifestyle differences and certain opportunities, depending on what products you're selling. We also look at personality. Do people have compulsive personalities, gregarious? Are they introverted or extroverted? Obviously, we look at these different personalities um, and that. Political marketers, people who are marketing a candidate, look at this sort of stuff all the time. In fact, it's primarily their primary form of segmentation. They're very interested. Let's say people who are interested in the gun rights, gun control issue, or other concerns. What are their top concerns? For some people, it's religious. And they're always looking at these beliefs and behaviors and attitudes because they know people will vote based on them. We also segment for business, and we look at a company. If we're selling a business-to-business product, what industry are they in? Is that an industry we want to serve? Are we trying to focus on large companies or small companies? I know one software company that makes a type of medical software, more for office management, and they have one version of their software for large hospitals and large medical centers, and others for small practices. So they've chosen actually to serve both segments. Obviously, location, geography is an issue as well here. Other operating variables, what technologies are they using? PC or Mac or whatever other technologies may be relevant to them. What's their usage status? Are they high users or low users? What capacities do they have? Are they able to take advantage of the product that you might be offering them, if it's a technological product? What is their purchasing approach? And I think we talked previously about procurement departments and things like that. Also, situational factors. Sometimes some products are needed very quickly. They might go a long time without calling for it, and then all of a sudden need it very quickly. In which case, you have to look at that type of customer. In my own case, doing my consulting, I actually made a deliberate decision not to go after customers who had urgent needs. The ones who had short deadlines, mainly because it interfered with my teaching and it created conflict. And all of a sudden I have a client call me and say, I need something by 3 o'clock today. And I might be having a class or a test. And I decided to focus on customers who didn't require that type of urgency. Now, in the past, previous to my teaching, I had clients who, they'd call me and they need something within a couple hours, and I would be able to service them, and that was quite profitable. But I made a decision not to service that type of client anymore. Other things are, specific applications or maybe the sizes of orders, and that can be important. This has a lot to do with companies' capacity for production, but you also have clients who customers who need products in varying quantities. Some need huge amounts, others need very small amounts. So also, there are the personal characteristics of the people involved in the company that you might be trying to serve. Are they similar to you? And that might be helpful. Or are they very different? Do they have similar attitudes towards risk and towards loyalty? Loyalty, of course, is something that seems to be going by the wayside, unfortunately. And there are people who argue that there is no place for loyalty in certain types of business, and it should only be based on profits. And I'm not so sure that's completely true because there is a personal element in business. People want to work with people they're comfortable with, people who are dependable and people who are loyal. And I've had the privilege of working for some clients who were very loyal. Um, and I liked, those type of clients, but I've also worked with some clients who have no loyalty whatsoever. So, um, and there are some, people who say, some companies or suppliers who say loyalty is not important to them, because if they have the best offering, they don't need people to be loyal to them. They don't need that sentimentality. Some requirements for effective segmentation. And I just want to make a point that you don't have to choose to only use one type of segmentation. Uh, many companies will look at combinations, let's say a combination of behavioral or geographic or demographic together. Um, so you're not required to, you pick only one type of segmentation. Some requirements, obviously it needs to be measurable. We need to be able to measure the size and other aspects of this market group. Again, we're taking our market and slicing it into different slices, and we need to be able to measure the size of those slices. Or is it a large, we're talking about a larger market segment or a smaller market segment? That will, of course, play a part in the decision which segments you're going to target later. So size, purchasing power, that sort of thing. Are they easily accessible? Sometimes there are certain market segments that are very difficult to access. Imagine if you had a product that was, preferred for hermits or for people who are not as connected with, the rest of society. In one particular case, accessibility was an issue for us. I worked on a product called GastroGuard. It was an anti-ulcer medication used for horses. And you probably wouldn't know this unless you have a background in horses. Most horses that are performance horses, like race horses or jumpers or dressage horses, I assume they like this activity. They seem to enjoy it. However, they do 10%, if I remember correctly, of performance horses, like race horses, get ulcers. And we actually had a medication that would deal with that, treat that very well. However, the prime decision maker was not the owner. It was the equine or horse veterinarian. And it was actually very difficult to meet with these people. They're not in clinics. They're actually horse doctors are in their trucks going from farm to farm or racetrack to racetrack. We did figure out finally that we knew there was one place they would almost always be at a certain time of day, and that would be at the racetrack early in the morning, 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. That way, they were watching the horses for the early morning workout, checking them out. And so we would set up informational breakfasts for them, give them breakfast, but then, also give them a technical presentation. And it turned out to be quite a successful tactic. But if we weren't able to connect with that horse veterinarian, that could have been a problem. So you have to have that market segment has to be accessible to you. If it's not really worth considering. So they have to be reachable through promotion. And they also need to be substantial. They need to be of a substantial size to worth, going after. I have occasionally consulted with some clients who they came up with a product that might have been a good product, but there was not going to be a substantial market segment. And I specifically remember one technological product, and I actually turned down working for them because I felt I didn't feel ethically I could. It wasn't that there was anything unethical about this person or this company, but I just didn't think the product was going to be successful with any of the market segments that we had looked at. It was a clever product, but it was sort of a solution to a problem that didn't really exist, and there would not be a substantial market segment for it. There wasn't much of a market for it, um, so it wouldn't have warranted the marketing activities. Is it differentiable? What I mean by that is, can we differentiate one group from another in a significant way? For instance, if we're talking about something about, like, let's say, insurance, would left-handed people and right-handed people react differently? And the answer is obviously no. It would, for a certain medication, would married women or unmarried women react differently? And probably not. So we have to only segment in ways that are relevant, in that they would make a difference in the decision the customer would make, or make a difference in the way we would have to market the product, make the product different for one segment versus another. Obviously, insurance would not be any different for a left-handed or a right-handed person. So segmenting them by handedness would be pointless. It would be a very ineffective type of market segmentation. They're not going to react differently. And is it actionable? I mean, do you have the ability to execute separate marketing programs for those segments? You may look at the market and you may come up with, 5 or 6, maybe even 7 different market segments. Do you have the ability to go after all of them? Or do you have the ability to go after, which ones do you have the ability to go after? And that's when you have to look at them and say, okay, we're going to focus on this group, and we're not going to spend any time focusing on another group. And this is what we get into targeting. And this is the second stage of our 3-part process. We need to target, as we look at all the market segments, all these slices of the pie, which ones are we going to pay attention to and decide to serve? Targeting marketing consists of the target market consists of a set of buyers who have common needs and characteristics that the company decides to serve. And it can be a mistake to say, oh, we're going to go after everybody. I remember being in a meeting and somebody telling me about a meeting they had with somebody at Barks Soda. If you're not familiar with it, Barks makes cream soda and root beer and other sodas. And apparently the head of the company said, our target market is anyone who has lips. And everyone kind of laughed at that, and it was kind of clever, but it really wasn't, and it wasn't target marketing. They were going after everybody, and that can be a mistake, to try to go after everybody, because you're not targeting any one group. You have to adjust this is what we'll talk about in product positioning. You have to adjust your marketing to resonate with certain people, certain market segments, and you have to choose which ones you're going to try to do that with. Excuse me. In evaluating the market segments, you look at their, each segment's size and growth. The structural attractiveness of each group. Is there a lot of competition for certain types of people for that particular target market? Are there, for instance, if you look at the rental car industry, where the action is at the airport. People travel from one city to another. They get to that city. They didn't bring their car with them. They can't, so they have to rent a car. And number one, I believe, in the market is Hertz and Avis, and then there's a few others. And Enterprise is there too, but Enterprise decided they're not going to work that hard. I mean, they're at the airports, but they're not at every airport because they know the level of competition is very high. So they've actually decided to target a different market, and that is the people who have to, for a few days, need to give up their car. Like I had to give up my car a few years ago because I had to have some repairs done to it. I had been rear-ended, and I had to have the back section of my car replaced, and that took I think 3 days. And I rented a car, from Enterprise, and that's why they come to pick you up, because it's people who are temporarily without cars. Um, if they went all in on the airport market, there was just too high a level of competition. So uh, other questions are there substitute products for this target market? If there are a lot of substitute products, it might be a higher level of competition. Also, what's the power of the buyers? What's the power of the suppliers? Um, you know, is it structurally attractive to go after these people? Is there, and how much competition is there, and how much responsive they will be? How much responsiveness will there be? The other part is, does the company have the resources to go after a certain number of, um, uh, all those segments? Uh, One of my early marketing plans was actually for a bank, and when I showed it to somebody who knew a little bit better about banking, he said, forget this market segment. Forget you're trying to go after every market segment, and that's not really the bank will not have those resources to do that, and you have to focus again. And this goes back to the 80-20 rule. 80% of the revenue will come from 20% of the customers. How much time and money and other resources do you want to spend going after that remaining 20%, remaining 80% that's only give you at most 20% of your revenue? So, and when you get into specific situations, you can make those judgment calls. Maybe you're doing really well with your type A, your A level customers, and maybe you're trying to enhance your B or C level customers. Again, that's a judgment that you would have to make with the specific information. Um, there are several approaches when you do target. One is almost, again, not targeting. It's called undifferentiated or mass marketing. Mass marketing was made very popular with the invention of television back in the 1950s. Now, with a single medium, I could reach millions of people in their homes. And so there was this enormous push for mass marketing to everyone. The advertising, however, was very generic. You got some very creative advertising, but it was never very targeted. Someone referred to it as the era of the ER words, where products were bigger, stronger, lighter, whiter, better, and you talked about the product, and you didn't really talk too much about the customer, because the customer was so diverse. Very difficult to talk about them. So unlike, let's say, magazines, which are very differentiated, we go after different market segments. We've sliced up our pie, and for each group that we choose to serve, we are going to alter our marketing mix, whether it's our advertising or something else, just for them. And if we go in the opposite direction, we can do concentrated or niche marketing. And this is where we go after a market segment that's usually very small, often overlooked. This is, again, moving to the more long tail part of the market, the people who don't buy as much, but maybe they're not being focused on, and maybe they're being underserved. And there may be, particularly for new products that have a lot of competition, maybe this is the way to go. Maybe going after a smaller group that is not being served, and maybe tailoring your offering just for them could be quite successful, particularly if you have very big competitors who are not paying attention. Then we have micro marketing, and this breaks down to a number of alternatives. Local marketing, and again, we're getting very small here, where you have you're serving very local communities. Restaurants would be a perfect example. They are only going to focus on people in the immediate area. Very rarely do people travel a long way to eat at a particular restaurant. They certainly will rarely go beyond more than half an hour. unless there's a specific event going on there. We have individual or customized marketing, and this is where our market segment is one person. Think of tailors like this, people who will actually sew a garment for one particular person. And you sometimes will see in particularly older movies where there's a rich person, like a millionaire, where he's standing there with his tailor while somebody else is talking to him, and he's wearing a suit, but there's no arms because the arms haven't been tailored yet. This is something that is much more expensive, but you see this with dressmakers as well. Other custom-made products. Another example would be, I believe, Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce, or maybe it's Bentley, I forget which. They will actually custom make a vehicle for you. It takes about 9 months. Coincidentally, it's like the gestation period of a baby. And they will, you will choose the type of paneling you'll have on the dashboard, the type of upholstery, the paint job. I think a perfect example of this was John Lennon's vehicle, which actually had roses painted all over it. So it was a very custom-made vehicle. And so these are obviously very expensive products because they are customized. And because there's a lot of time and effort. It's not so much the materials perhaps, but the time and effort, the labor that goes into customizing that makes it cost so much. And usually these are for high net worth individuals. Mass customization, however, the idea of customizing, but doing it on a mass scale, this was enabled greatly by technology. And we see, well, as an example, if you want to buy a computer, purchased a computer online a number of times, and I go onto the website and I choose the size of the screen. I choose the general model, but then I can choose the different components, the different types of chips, whether I want a wireless mouse with it, and a whole bunch of other options. And now they don't have all the combinations and permutations in the factory or in a warehouse. What happens is, they probably do this robotically, but they used to do it where a person would get the order and go and pull the different components, put them in a basket, and send it down to the assembly department, who would assemble all the components that you had requested. So actually, the computer is being customized for you, but it's done in such an efficient way that it's not overly expensive. And thanks to the internet and databases and obviously computers, and more recently print on demand, digital printing. Used to be when a book was out of print, that was it. But now we can print a single book on demand at relatively low cost. So that's why Amazon has what I call the infinite bookshelf. You can do that, and that so we can try to customize more and more products. I believe the Scion car does that, and there are probably a whole bunch of other examples that perhaps you could come up with. So once we have segmented the market, and from those various segments that we have identified, we have chosen to target those. And we then need to position our product for the specific target markets we've chosen to serve. Excuse me. And so product positioning is the way the product will be defined by the consumer, in the mind of the consumer. And consumers will position products with or without the help of marketers. They will make their own evaluation. Now, of course, we want to help them make that evaluation. We want to advertise it and provide information, because if we don't help them, certainly our competitors will, and our competitors will not position our product in a positive light. I remember we had one product and we had a competitor come out and they tried to position our product as being old. and ineffective. They were the next generation and we were the last generation. Um, and that's not a particularly unique type of positioning that companies will try to impose. But we want to help the consumer have a positive view of our product. And you're familiar with certain products. There's certain products that you think very highly of, you've positioned them well, and other have not such a great opinion of. And that is, positioned that way. You have some, well, we'll talk more about example of cars in a little bit. Certain cars you think of in one way, and other cars you think of in a different way, different brands. Successful positioning does depend upon choosing the best competitive advantage. What can your product do, your brand do better than anyone else? Maybe it's quality, maybe it's speed, maybe it's convenience, maybe it's something else. What's that best advantage that you can do? And this means you focus on what's called the unique selling proposition, sometimes called the USP, unique selling proposition. What is it that your product can do that no other product can? Now, it may not be some feature that the product has. Maybe it's just something, you know, um, maybe it's service or delivery or something like that. And we'll talk more about that. Certain companies have pushed very hard to position their products, and it's very difficult for two products to hold the same positioning. Crest, for 60 years, has pushed their toothpaste as they are the anti-cavity toothpaste. I remember even as a little kid, they're talking about fluoride and to prevent cavities, and that was the biggest thing. Now, other uh, toothpastes have positioned themselves as anti-whitening. Whitening toothpastes, and this actually is a result of, I don't want to say the baby boomers, but people living longer. As you get older, your teeth get a little yellower, and so, and just a general more attention to cosmetics, cosmetic appearance. Um, so Crest has not done as well in recent years because they position themselves as the anti-cavity toothpaste. Others have positioned themselves as providing more whitening. Now, Crest does have whitening toothpaste, but it has not been as distinctive as others. Uh, if I were to ask you, I tell you I need some place to where I really need to buy stuff at really low prices. I don't have a lot of money. Walmart is probably the place that comes to mind. It is their slogan is, or their positioning is everyday low prices. So if you need something and you don't have a lot of money, you go to Walmart. If I told you I need to buy a new car and I've got young kids and I'm really concerned about keeping them safe, and um, one car that has positioned itself as being the safe car is Volvo. Volvo they developed the concept of the safety cage, for passengers. It is considered one of the safest cars. It was not the coolest car. In fact, some of the old, if you look at the older Volvos, they were really boxy. Um, they were not. They couldn't position themselves as the cool car, the high performance car, but they were the safe car. And when baby boomers started having kids, they wanted Volvos. Not exclusively, but a lot of that's when Volvo really took off, at least in the United States. I'll give you another example here. I don't have it on the screen, but if I were to ask you, say, I want to, I'm hungry, I want to go and I want to go to some place and get something healthy to eat. What kind of restaurant would I go? Obviously, you wouldn't tell me to go to McDonald's. Um, and probably a lot of you would suggest I go to Subway. Subway, their slogan is "Eat Fresh." They actually will make the sandwich in front of you, and they'll ask you, do you want cucumbers? Do you want lettuce, or spinach, tomatoes, all that stuff? So they are the sort of the healthy, fast food choice. Not as fast as McDonald's, but they will they'll make you a healthy sandwich. At some point, Subway started losing market share, and they were losing it to a new competitor called Quiznos. And Quiznos's positioning was very different. Quiznos said, "Hey, we have more meat," and they would talk about they have more meat in their sandwiches, and that got the people at Subway very nervous, and so they started talking about they had more meat, and that confused people. Wait a minute, we don't associate meat with healthier, and wait a minute, are you not healthy anymore since you're offering more meat? And it actually hurt them. They started losing sales even more. They finally had to go back to the eat fresh positioning. So you don't want to change your positioning too easily, too quickly. You want to do it, it has to be a really significant reason for doing it. I'll give you an example where it was appropriate to change positionings. For many years, Ivory Soap positioned itself as being pure soap. Initially they said they were 100% pure. They later had to say 99.99% pure because of a lawsuit, but they were still pure, pure soap. However, as people became more aware of skin health, soap is not actually the greatest thing for your face. If you want to maintain a good skin tone, you should have some moisturizer, some conditioner, whatever. And Ivory held on to their positioning for far too long. Eventually, they changed it, but that was a major shift. There was a major shift in the market, and that's why they had to shift their positioning. I don't think they've ever really come back and made been the success they once were. But they did have to change their positioning. But when you look at somebody like Subway, Subway should not have switched their positioning. They should have stuck with their positioning, and they've held out. I think they're doing a lot better than Quiznos these days. Pardon me. There is a temptation to try to hold multiple positions, and that is a mistake. If you increase the number of product claims, it dilutes the message. People are not going to spend their day thinking about your product. They have a minimum amount of brain space to think about it. And if you try to be too many things, if you notice, Crest was anti-cavity, Walmart was low prices, Volvo is safety, Ivory was 100% pure, Subway was eat fresh. It was very simple, not too complex. If you try to be too many things, you end up being nothing. And belief, how can you be everything? And you lose your clear positioning as Subway started to do, but they self-corrected. So these are some things you should think about when you're trying to position your product there. When doing that, and I talked about the unique selling proposition, you need to differentiate yourself from your competitors. Now, if you can do that through product differentiation, and by that I mean you can differentiate yourself through the features and benefits, or maybe you have a unique offering, that's great. If you can do that, fantastic. However, it's very difficult to do these days because your competitors will try to copy you. So how do and if you can still do this, great. What you might have to do is differentiate yourself with service. Maybe you have delivery or some associated services, like support services. Like my IT guy who I hire from time to time, I remember he installed a new antivirus software, and it was a brand I had not heard of. I said, why? He said, well, yes, it's just as good as the Microsoft version, but the difference is, and I'm not saying it's better than the Microsoft version, but he said, this is a new company, they're small, I can call them up and I can speak to people there, where I can't, Microsoft, there's nobody I can speak to. I just have to spend, enormous amounts of time trying to research things, where there's a helpline at this other company. So it differentiated itself not by being better than the Microsoft product, but by having that helpline, being able to have tech support that was superior to a larger company. It might be the convenience of obtaining the product, such as channel differentiation. There are some products that are obviously very easy to obtain. You can go online and buy them. Obviously, you can go to the retailer and buy them. There's some products that sometimes are a little bit harder, unfortunately, and that works against them. One of a couple of my products that are or services that are my favorite, actually both have to do with food. One was a catering service in Manhattan, and they would deliver, but they would deliver anywhere. They would deliver to an apartment. They would deliver to a business office. They would deliver to we had them deliver to a furniture showroom one time. We were doing a production, filming or shooting film, photographs. We actually had them deliver to Bethesda Fountain in the middle of Central Park, which was, I always wanted to test them and see if they would deliver to a subway station. But they would, wherever you were, they would deliver, and they were known for high quality food. But what differentiated them was that they would deliver to offbeat places, places, other places wouldn't deliver to Bethesda Fountain. Another one of my favorites in terms of channel differentiation is Trails End Popcorn. Very good popcorn, but you can't buy it in a retail store. I don't think you can buy it online. I think you can, but they don't really push that. They distribute their product as a fundraiser product, mostly with the Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, and other types of organizations where where they essentially use it as fundraisers, and there's nothing quite like opening the door and there's a young little Cub Scout trying to sell popcorn. And I knew people who couldn't eat popcorn for reason of dentures or something else, but they would still buy some and say, okay, here, you take the package back. I'm going to give you my popcorn. It's actually a very successful brand. It's a niche brand, but they do differentiate to themselves well. Another way to differentiate yourself, if you can't do any of these others, but even if you can, is to differentiate your image. You're probably aware that certain brands have certain personalities. You look at Apple or Mac, they have a certain personality as opposed to a PC. A great example is, and let's do a thought experiment here for a moment. Imagine we have two rooms. One we're going to call the Coca-Cola room, and the other we're going to call the Pepsi room. Now, you've been given the assignment to decorate these rooms in the style, in the feeling of these rooms, of these brands. But you can't use any overt logos. You can't use the signature colors. You can't use the polar bears for Coke. You just have to have the feeling of it. And so the question is, what kind of furniture would you put in each? And generally people say, well, I want to put really comfortable furniture in the Coca-Cola room, sort of traditional, that sort of thing. In the Pepsi room, I'm going to put sort of cutting edge furniture, really modern furniture. I say, okay, what about music? And well, we'll have, they'll pick whoever's the hottest musical artist at the time. And that's who they'll have play in the Pepsi room. And maybe they'll have more classical music or folk music or something more traditional in the Coca-Cola room. And that's actually a very good way of thinking of those two brands. Coca-Cola is very traditional. It's Americana. Pepsi is always what's hip, what's up to date. If you look at who their brand spokesman or spokespeople were, Beyonce, Britney Spears. You go back a little earlier, it was Madonna and Michael Jackson. You go back to the 1980s, it was Michael J. Fox, who at the time was, the number one person on TV with the show Family Ties and the Back to Future movies. So Pepsi is always very up to date. Coca-Cola is more traditional. And those positions have worked very well for them. And if you think about them, there's not much difference between them. They're distributed the same way. They're essentially brown carbonated sugar water. That's it. And so the best way for them to differentiate from each other is to have image differentiation. And you can apply image differentiation to other products that maybe have other ways to differentiate themselves. But you always want to set your product apart from your competition. And you've got to figure out the way to do that. Let's take a look at a couple ads. This first ad is for the Crest Spin Brush Pro toothbrush. It's an electric toothbrush put out by Crest. Again, kind of ties into their anti-cavity positioning. Has a dentist cleaning. I'm sorry, let me read the headline. Get a dentist cleaning twice a year. Have a dentist clean feeling twice a day. That dentist clean feeling, I'm not sure how you feel. I generally take good care of my teeth, but when I go to the dentist, I love how my teeth feel after I've had them cleaned. And that, I mean, I don't eat for a couple hours because I know my teeth will never feel that clean for another 6 months. Because they do a kind of a deep cleaning on it. And if I were to ask you what market segment was this targeted towards? Well, you might say adults. You might say people who really care about their teeth, which would tend to be adults. I find children are not that worried about cavities or general dental health. And that would make sense. And that is exactly who it is targeted towards. Now, if I were to ask you who this next ad is targeted towards, now this is essentially the same product. It's a spin brush, electric toothbrush, but I think you've already realized that this is targeted towards children. Dora is very popular with children. It's more colorful. They've also given some options in the bottom right corner. If you're not a Dora fan, you can have these other, something looks like a race car, one looks like a fire engine, another looks like a dolphin, another one's like an old cell phone. And obviously, this is targeted towards children, but it isn't just the advertising. If you look closely, there is another aspect of differentiation here. And that's in the product. It's not simply that Dora is on the handle, but also if you look at the head, it's a much smaller brush head. If you look at the one on the right, that might even choke a kid. I remember when I was a little kid having a big toothbrush in my mouth. I hated it. So the toothbrush on the right in the Dora ad is actually a product that they've altered the product for the target market. This is an excellent example of altering your product for your target market. However, I have nothing against Dora, but I wouldn't want to use that toothbrush because that toothbrush is a little too small for my mouth. I mean, I could probably brush my teeth with it, but it would just take too long. So I will probably choose the one on the left or regular toothbrush. So this is, we understand it's not just changing the advertising. It might be changing the price, the product, it might be changing the distribution. So something to consider. When we look at how we position our product, we do have to look at our competitors. And we can use a lot of different dimensions. Quality, is it fashionable? Is it, is it exclusive? It's expense. Just as an example, we're going to look at a map here. Sorry, I forgot there were sound effects in this slide. And the vertical the vertical axis is the level of quality, the level of perceived quality, the perception of quality. It doesn't actually have to mean quality, but the perception of quality. And along the horizontal axis, we have price. And in the bottom left, we have Kia and Hyundai as an example. They are considered to be relative to the other cars, other brands listed here, to be of a lower price and a lower quality. Now, that doesn't mean they're bad cars, but relative to the others, they're perceived to be less. Honda and Toyota are kind of in the middle. And then in the upper right, we see Lexus and Mercedes. Mercedes is higher priced, but Lexus is roughly about the same quality. And we see this it kind of moves from the bottom left to the top right, sort of on a axis. You don't see anything much in the upper left quadrant. You know, high quality for low price, because price kind of signals quality. You know, if I offered you a Mercedes for, you know, a new Mercedes for $5,000, you'd say, what the hell's wrong with it? Because that price is a signal of quality. And you're not going to see very much in the bottom right who's going to pay a high price for a low quality car. So it's going to be, if you think of, there's a line through there, it was a positive slope. Now, you might have noticed that Jaguar is a little bit off that diagonal axis. Jaguar is very highly priced, but the quality is not consistently high. I'm not so sure about the Jaguars produced today. However, in the past, Jaguar had a reputation for being not very good mechanically. The idea was, well, you better have another car because your Jaguar, as beautiful as it is going to break down every few weeks. So you have to, you know, and there was an old joke about Ford, that Ford stood for fix or repair daily, but that was probably more aptly applied to Jaguar. I believe they have improved in recent years, but so why, if they're not as high quality, why would they have a higher price? Well, the thing is, it is a very elegant car, particularly some of the older ones. Very sleek, very very elegant, very luxurious. So maybe if there was a third axis here, we would put Jaguar. Jaguar would be very high on that third axis of beauty, or, you know, sexiness, or whatever you want to call it. So there's not necessarily just two dimensions here, but something to consider. You really, if you want to figure out where you're going to be positioned, you have to look at where your competitors fit in a perceptual map. So, we also look at various value propositions. And this is, what are we getting versus what we're giving? So, and here we have a grid with 9 categories, but really there's only 5. If you're on the left, we have the degree of benefit we receive versus on the top x-axis, the price we pay. We can spend more and receive more, or get more for paying more, get more for paying the same, get more for less, which is actually a very difficult value proposition to maintain. We'll get into that in a bit. We get the same for less money, or we can get less, but for much less money. Okay. The other 4 really don't count. To say, oh, we're going to give you more, we're going to give you the same, but we're going to charge you more. That's not really a very good value proposition. Giving you the same for the same, and we're going to give you less for more and less for the same. These just don't fly, so we're not even going to consider them. So there are really 5, in terms of exchange and transactions, only really 5 relevant value propositions here. And let's look at it as an example of a few of them. Getting more for more. Well, that could be, we can look at various different product categories. Ritz-Carlton, I don't know if any of you have ever stayed in a Ritz-Carlton hotel. You are getting a lot more. I stayed in Ritz-Carlton hotel back in the, I guess it was the 80s. I had never seen an in-room mini bar before. I mean, it was really a very elegant restaurant. Elegant hotel, and it had an elegant restaurant too. I didn't. I wasn't actually paying for it. It was on business. Uh, Very nice hotel. Quite a luxury. So you are paying more. And when I saw the bill, I was shocked. I said, "Thank God I wasn't paying for it." Same with Mercedes. Mercedes, you're paying more, but you're getting more. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Mont Blanc pen. Um, a Mont Blanc pen can be as high as $300, maybe even more. I do appreciate a good writing instrument. I have a decent one here, but I don't sure I would pay 300. But I have tested them. They write beautifully, and for some people are very particular about their pens. I know Neil deGrasse Tyson, for instance, is a big pen aficionado. I am sure he has some Mont Blanc pens. He prefers, I believe, fountain pens, but overall, these are high quality pens for people who are aficionados of it and who are willing to pay. Again, more for more. Haagen-Dazs is a more expensive ice cream, but it is a creamier ice cream. It is a richer ice cream. Never turned down Haagen-Dazs. Um, and so these are high-end, more for more value proposition products. Get more for the same compared to Mercedes. Yeah, I would getting Mercedes quality, but not at quite the price. And you can probably find some more at that category. Getting the same for less. Well, this is where actually I have to get rid of Circuit City here, but Walmart. Certainly, you're getting the products in Walmart are the same. As long as there's a branded product, it's just as good as the same product you get anywhere else, but they do it at a lower price. The same for Best Buy. Again, I apologize. I should have deleted Circuit City. Uh, Getting less for much less. This may seem like an odd category, but if you think of like Motel 6, Motel 6 is a very basic motel. Uh, I don't think they have pools. They don't have nice restaurants or anything like that. It is a traveler's motel. It's like maybe truck drivers or somebody who's traveling a long distance. They're not traveling to this location. They're traveling to a more distant location. As an example, for instance, years ago, I took my family to Walt Disney World down in Florida, and we drove down. And I think in South Carolina, we stopped for the night, and we stayed at a Motel 6. It was clean. Um, their positioning is their motto is we'll leave the light on for you. The idea is that most of Motel 6's customers come late at night. They're traveling a long distance. They're not going to hang out in the area. So it's, a comfortable bed, clean sheets, not a lot of special amenities, and it's a basic. And so you're paying much less. You're getting less and paying much less. Costco, you're not getting usually the top brands in many cases, but you're paying you're paying much less. Southwest Airlines again, and a lot of actually airlines have followed in Southwest's footprints. Southwest was a basic airline. You didn't get snacks. You didn't get food unless you wanted to pay for it. They had a very good attitude. If you flew on a Southwest airline flight, they treated you very nicely, but they didn't give you a lot of extra stuff. It was a very basic kind of offering, and in more recent years, other companies have followed in their footsteps. Uh, Getting more for less, I put this last because it is the most difficult to deliver for a number of reasons. One is it puts a lot of pressure on your profit margins. If you're giving more and charging less, that makes it very difficult to make a profit. It is something that everyone claims to do, but it's very difficult to deliver. Also, it risks a certain credibility. Why can you give us all this stuff for that much less? One example that did deliver for a while was Home Depot. Home Depot when it first opened. Obviously, if you, and it still does, it is that it is like going to a warehouse. They have a full range of products, and they gave you something more. They had sales associates who were very knowledgeable about everything. I remember going there, and I needed advice on how to do certain home projects, and they actually had people who actually understood that, understood how to do these things. There were a lot of contractors who were out, who had left the industry for a little while. For There was a recession, and it was very difficult to be a contractor. So they worked at Home Depot, and as a result, they knew how to do plumbing projects and carpentry projects. Uh, the However, Home Depot was not able to maintain that. Um, I've noticed a difference in the sales associates. There's some that are still knowledgeable, but not all of them. Also, Home Depot tried to expand, and so they didn't maintain the quality and the lower prices the way they once had. Um, and I'm not trying to put down Home Depot. I still go there, uh, but it's not what it once was. But and because this value proposition is very difficult to maintain, and when people promise more for less, I get a little bit skeptical. So we have to be careful about that. It can happen, but be careful. So my question is, what will your value proposition be for your product or your service? What is it that you will do? How will you differentiate yourself? What will your unique selling proposition be? And in doing part of that is that you will want to develop a positioning statement that describes your unique selling proposition. It summarizes how a firm wants consumers to think of their brand. Again, the positioning occurs in the mind of the consumer. And a typical positioning statement is written as follows: to the target market with a need, our brand, whatever your brand is the concept that provides some point of difference. So here, to busy people, Enterprise is a car rental company that is the most convenient way to obtain rental vehicles. And it's not, now they're not saying they provide better vehicles, they provide them cheaper, they provide them in the most convenient way. They will come to pick you up wherever you are, and bring you to the rental car company to do the paperwork, and then you can drive away with the vehicle. Which is a very convenient. Imagine if your car was damaged and had to go to the mechanic, and you had no way. You'd have to figure out a way to get to the rental car place at a different rental car brand. But Enterprise actually will pick you up, making it the most convenient way to obtain rental vehicles. Now, this doesn't necessarily sound like a very sexy statement. It is not meant to be a slogan or a headline. It is an internal statement. This is what you want people to think about your brand. And if you do advertising or promotion that doesn't follow this positioning statement as its guide, it may be off message. It may not be appropriate for your brand. Okay, that is the end of this lecture, which goes with Chapter 7 and Module 6. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Don't forget to also participate in any discussions or simulations that are associated with this module. Take care.